Hey,
Hello. Welcome back.
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, we're so glad you're here. We were just talking all about your book and how much we enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
So, will you start out and just tell us a little bit about how you decided to write this story and everything that you wove into it?
Sure. It's interesting how books come to you. Sometimes, you're inspired by something that happens in your life. Sometimes you're inspired by, something you want to do or research. And I think for me, this book was a little bit of both. I was, interestingly enough, I was like just folding up laundry in my bedroom one night, and I was watching the evening news, and the um, the anchor, the reporter, was interviewing a woman who had her house had been damaged severely by a hurricane that had come through. And she was telling him that she could not get repairs on her house because she couldn't prove that she owned the house. Now, the house had been in her family for generations. She had been born in the house. Her mother had been born in the house, and grandparents and great grandparents had owned this house, but there was never a will um, that disposed of the property, through legal means. And so whoever was living in the house when grandma or grandpa died, that's who kind of took over the house. And so because she could not prove that she owned the house, she didn't have title to the house, she couldn't prove that she owned it through a will, she couldn't get FEMA funds to repair the house. And so she was living outside of a house on property that her family had owned for generations. And something about that story just stuck with me. I turned the TV off after a little while, and I was still thinking about that story. Now, I'm a lawyer by training, um, and I did not know as much about this property. This is the legal concept by which the book is talking about. And so, like I said, I started researching and found that it is essentially a crime in plain sight, that so much generational wealth is lost because people cannot simply demonstrate that they own the property on which they sit. And so I just finished writing my my second book, I guess was my second book at the time. And my editor asked me, what did I want to write? Now, if anybody's been following me, my first book was a legal thriller. And so my editor was like, write another one of those. And I was like, nah, I don't want to write that. So I wrote a historical fiction thriller. And so after that, my editor was like, write another one of those. I was like, nah, I don't want to write that. And so I decided to write this book.
You're like, I'm going to just
Yeah.
keep going in
That's,
different directions.
I know I probably ought to stick to one thing, but I really do tend to write about those things that they touch me, they're important to me. And interestingly enough, I write about issues that while I find them very personal, um, other people find them that way too. I've had people come to me and say, you know what, I felt the same thing, or that happened in my family, or you opened up a world I never thought about. And now I'm interested in that topic. So fingers crossed I'm on the right track.
Well, I mean, that's what I love about fiction is a compelling story, but learning things that I have not encountered before. And I
Right.
thought that was such an interesting topic. And it's so sad. I mean, can you imagine you've lived on this land forever, you've paid the taxes, you've done everything you're supposed to, and then you potentially can lose it because if the sale is triggered by one person and you can't come up with the money to pay for the property, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. It happens every day. And it doesn't just happen, excuse me, among poor Blacks. It happens among, poor white Appalachians in the Native American community. It happens in big cities, it happens in small towns, wherever people find an opportunity. And knowing that there's a segment of the population that does not have access to all the resources that would help them protect their property, like lawyers and accountants and resources that would help them establish, estate planning, then that's an opportunity for them to move in and usurp these people's property. Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
really sad.
It is
Yeah.
really sad. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was the Georgia Low Country, the Gullah Geechee. I thought that
Mhm.
was fascinating. How did you decide to set it there?
You know what? It's interesting. My husband and I go down to the Low Country at least a couple times a year, just to vacation. And we've been doing that since, gosh, decades. Um, and so, I've just always enjoyed that part of the country. And I think I must have gravitated to it through osmosis or something. When I was young, my mother would always say, we come from Geechee, we are Geechee. And, I was young and, in high school, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's nice. I got to go to this party. And so I would never explore that with her. Um, and I know that, as I started to research heirs property, the Gullah Geechee community is impacted by this plight in huge, huge ways because that land in low country is very, very valuable now. It sits right on the Atlantic Ocean. It's just beautiful down there. And so real estate developers see a major opportunity to profit from it. And so I've always been fascinated with that. Of course, unfortunately, I waited until after my mom had passed and then started to think, yeah, okay, so I need to know this part of my history. And so this book gave me an opportunity to research and delve into that. It is a wonderfully rich and vibrant culture. And, the language, if you've read the book, of course, I used some of the language, the actual Geechee language, which is still the only intact African Creole language in this country.
Wow.
And, yeah. And so for decades, people were, um, admonished and they were ridiculed about their language and, told that they spoke in broken English. But this language descends directly from the Africans that were, brought to this country and enslaved. They had to cobble together a way because, the Africans that came to this country came from many different tribes in Africa. And so they spoke dialects and different languages. So they had to figure out a way, kind of cobble together a language so that everybody kind of understood everybody. And hence that Creole dialect, that Geechee dialect. So it was a really, really fun project in that way because I felt like I was actually digging into my past as well.
Oh, well, I thought it was fascinating. And I think it's such a fascinating culture. And it was interesting. And I was so glad you used the dialect and the words. And it was interesting to see that.
Thank you.
We talked about grief too. And how well you
Mm.
portrayed grief with Dina and her mother and, being so sad and struggling with all of that. Tell us a little bit about how you put that to the page.
I have told people that this book is probably the most personal one out of the books that I've written because I think I tapped into my own grief. Um,
I
yourself.
think, Wanda, we
Um,
may be
but
losing you. Can y'all hear her?
oh, can you
Breaking
hear
up.
me?
And you're frozen, I think. I didn't know if it was just on my end, but let's see.
Gonna try something because
Oh, there she went. I'm sure she'll be back in a second. Oh, there we
All
go.
right. Is that,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Sorry about
I'm
that. Okay, so
going to
personal book, that's where we were.
if unstable. So yeah, it's the most personal of my books because I tapped into, of course, my own grief after I lost my mom years ago. And I realized, I kind of didn't set out to write a book about grief because like nobody wants to read about that, or at least I thought.
Oh,
Um, and I needed this character, this protagonist, to be in a really, really vulnerable space. And death of a loved one like kind of cuts you off at the knees. I can't describe it any other way. And losing a mother that you are close to is like a unique and particularly devastating loss. And so for me, I tapped into that because even though my mom died years ago, I still have days, I still have her birthday or Mother's Day where that grief is still kind of raw. And so that's how I came to put that layer around this particular character. And once I did, I realized that I must have been doing something that was cathartic for me because as I wrote the book, I kind of explored some of my own feelings around my loss and my grief. And I'll tell you, there's a scene in that book. Every single time I read it, I cry. Every single time. And so I wanted to take the reader through that, but to show the reader that loss is a process. It's not something that you necessarily get over. It is something that you learn to live with. Loss is something you learn to live with.
I think that's exactly right. And it seems to be something that people are exploring. I mean, it's obviously an evergreen topic, but it seems like the loss of a mother is showing up in a variety of stories right now. And it's interesting to see how people process grief and how they deal with it. And I always feel like I come away with something that's very helpful. And as you talked about wishing you had asked your mom stuff, I feel like I asked my mom so many things, but now there are still so many times where I'm like, oh, I wish you were here so I could, ask more about such and such that we did when we were young.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so funny because I think I wrote a line in the book that, grief is a sneaky little bitch. And so you are like going about your life and you're fine. And one day it could be something as innocuous as for Dina in the book, looking at another woman's fingernails and remembering that she and her mom used to go and get manicures. Or I remember for me, I was standing in a store and looked down at a woman's shoes and saw that they were the same shoes my mom had had when she was alive. And I had to leave the store and go to my car.
Yeah,
Like it is it, it can be a long, lengthy process,
it
is what I'll say.
definitely can. Well, I
Yeah.
have a bunch of questions, but I don't want to be the only one asking questions. So does anybody have anything they want to ask Wanda?
I guess just I loved the book, by the way, and I realized as I was talking to Cindy beforehand, I've read all of your books, so keep writing. I'll follow whatever genre you choose next. Um, but was the magical the focus on the spirits, is that a strong part of the culture?
It is. It is a very strong part of the Gullah Geechee culture. And it's so funny as I was researching this book, I found so many things. Like I said, I referenced back to how my mom said we were Geechee. I never explored that. So when I was researching this book, I started to uncover all these things. I was like, oh, my mother used to do that, or oh, we did that when we were growing up. And the spiritual realm is very, very ingrained in the culture. there's a deep belief, and I grew up and I still believe that, as we call them, the ancestors, the people who pass on, are the ones who kind of guide you, and there's a force. And so I don't want to get all woo woo, but it really is a very deep part of the culture.
And so as you were sort of, and I don't know if you, how much you plot or whatever, but so did you always know that that would be a part of the story, or did it kind of evolve?
No, I knew that that would be part of the story. I knew that I wanted to make sure that I had some focus on the language and the spiritual realm. Um, Now, how it all kind of came about between, Delilah and the mother, that was a process that evolved. And I kind of figured out as I started to write the story how these women, these ancestors, would be an integral part of her journey, not only through grief, but through solving the mystery as well. But I knew going into the book, I wanted to focus on those two things because I knew that I wanted to center the book around the Gullah Geechee community.
So did you always have Delilah as a voice, or did that come about as you were writing and working through plots?
You know what? Delilah was always a voice in the book. The Everybody's read it, so I can speak freely about, okay, spoiler. So Delilah was always a voice in the book. Her mother, however, coming in at the end was one of those moments that I had. Sometimes as a writer, you're kind of writing and then you stumble across a plot point or an idea and you're like, oh, that's really good. And so when I knew, because when I write my books, I never know how they're going to end. I have some general idea about who might be the bad guys and how I want to make sure they get their comeuppance, but I never really know how the book is going to end or exactly how I'm going to bring the book to a climax. So when I was trying to figure out how to bring the book to a climax, I was like, well, like, duh, her mother is an ancestor now. Of course she would help her. Um, and so her voice came in later, and it just tied seamlessly because you have in the Gullah Geechee community, caring for one another is a very, very big part of the community. And so I tried to do that by demonstrating, Jimmy's story. Like Jimmy had these three women in his life, right? But they were all caring for him. And I know if you're a feminist, you may not like this, but it's part of the culture that we take care of each other, just like, Jimmy takes Dina out to Rue's house that was destroyed by a hurricane and tells her she's not your enemy. We are helping one another here. And so, yeah, I knew that these women would be an integral part of the story.
Well, I love that. I thought it worked really well and was just intriguing, as you could hear their voice and know what was happening. I also like the way Delilah, well, I love that it ended up being Delilah and Holcomb's home that they were in. I mean, I felt bad for them, but it was interesting that that came around. And also that, and I can't not think of her name right now, the woman who ran the firm, Carol, what was her? Um, I can't remember her name,
Claire.
but Claire. But that she was
Oh,
bad.
Claire, yes.
Like I did not see that coming.
I didn't see that coming either, Cindy.
I was like, I usually can, like, that stuff will kind of usually work its way out in my head. And I got to the end and I was like, she totally got me. I loved it.
I did. That was another one of those moments where I had written that scene, excuse me, where you know, eh, Dina is brought back to the house. She's lured back to the house. And, I had written that scene and I thought to myself, because I always knew I wanted the dog to be in the story. Like Trooper had to stay throughout the story. I don't know why. Don't ask me. But I knew that I wanted him to be in the story. And so when they all kind of gather in the foyer of the house, I was like, well, wait a minute, where's Trooper, right? Because she has, Holcomb's dog. And
Right.
I thought, oh, she could bring Trooper in. And so that one caught me off guard. And I thought, this might work.
Yeah, it was good. It worked well. And the other thing I was telling them was I wish Holcomb had lived. I mean, I know he had to die, but I was sad. I was hoping he was just going to be relocated or something, but it makes sense that he died.
I get that. I get that a lot with my books. With my first book, they were like, why did you kill so and so? And with my second book, they were like, I wanted to pull my hair out. Why did you kill off so and so? But you know what? I try and make sure, this sounds crazy. I try and make sure that the people that I kill off in the story are done in the service of the story, right? I don't want to just like kill people off willy-nilly. I do it because something has happened in the story that kind of led to this precipice where this person became a victim because they were either being used as a pawn or there was somebody that, was being, abused, whatever. So I usually try and make the deaths in service of the story and not just kind of like killing people off because, there's some saying in publishing, if you want to ratchet up suspense or tension in a book, you bring in a guy with a gun or something like that. And I don't aspire to that. I really do believe that each character, even the secondary characters in the book, should serve a purpose and should be there for the story, to make the story work, to educate the reader, whatever that character is doing, but they should have a purpose in that story.
And it does need to be realistic. And it was more realistic that he would die, but I was just sad for him.
I know.
Carmen, did you want to ask about Spotify?
I did. Thank you, Wanda. I also very much enjoyed the story. And I was Googling you this afternoon, and on your website, only on my phone, I didn't find it on my laptop, but on my phone, there's a Spotify playlist for the book that is fabulous. Did you put that together?
I did. I did. I put a playlist together for all my books. Thank you, thank you, thank you for that because a lot of people don't like go to it or whatever. I need to like put that out more or something, but
Absolutely.
I love music. I love music. Now, it's interesting because when I am first drafting the book or writing new material, I cannot write to music. I can't listen to anything. I have to be in a room where it's quiet, no music, no noise. But then when I'm revising, I tend to listen to music and I listen to all kinds of music genres. And so I put together a playlist for every book. And so there's one for my first book, All Her Little Secrets. The historical book, Anywhere You Run, there's a playlist for that. And there's all sorts of music. There's country, there's jazz. And it's all music from the 1960s, from around 1960 to 1964. And so for this playlist, it's so interesting because the book has like a lot of grief in it. And I didn't want songs that were kind of downers and talked about grief, but they talked about relationships. So if you listen to that playlist, there are a lot of songs that talk about the relationships between people. There's a song at the end of the playlist, Live Down by the Water, is one where this woman talks about her daughter and they're going to live by the water and be happy. And then there's another one at the very end of the playlist, You're Not Alone. And that song, every time I hear it, it reminds me of my mom. I love that song. So if you haven't, go to Spotify and you can just type in What You Leave Behind and the playlist should come up. Thank you for that. I'm glad you got that. I need to promote that more because I really love the music.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful playlist. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
she was
you.
telling us that, and I'm like, oh, good. I'm gonna have to go pull it up. You should put it in your story and link it, and then that way people can know that you've got it out there. I think it's so much fun. I love when authors do that.
Oh, yeah, I'll do that. That's a great idea. I think I'll do that.
Anybody else have any questions they want to ask? I'm gonna ask about the cover and title in a minute, but I just want to make sure I don't cut anybody off if they. Cynthia?
Just wanted to say I loved your book. I couldn't put it down. And I'm not
You.
a thriller reader, and so now I'm looking forward to the backlist because this was just such an
Yeah.
amazing book, and I just love learning so much about the culture and the hair property. So absolutely loved it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I know I sometimes get that people are like, I don't read mysteries. I don't read thrillers. I don't read books where people get killed in them. And then they're like, okay, I'll read yours, but I don't read anybody else's. I try to write the kind of books that I like to read. When I was practicing law, I had to travel quite a bit, and I had to travel to California. I had to go out to Orange County, California, at least 1 or 2 times a month. So that's a 5 hour flight from Atlanta, where I live, 4.5 coming back. And so I would pick up a book, in the airport, or if I went to the library or something. I tried to get a book that was kind of fast paced, because then I could read it on the way out on the plane and on the way back in. Um, and so I think I must have, that kind of became my jam. And I must have started gravitating when I decided I was going to write, to do that. I like books that are pacey. Now I like to, luxuriate over a nice book, that's literary and a bit longer, but I think I tend to gravitate to the pacier thrillers. But thank you for that compliment.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought the pacing was perfect. It was so easy to read. Once I picked it up and got into it, I didn't want to put it down.
Thank you. Thank
Well,
you.
I love your cover, and I wanted to talk more about that and how it came about. I think it perfectly represents the story.
Isn't that cover gorgeous? They just knock it out the park. William Morrow knocks it out the park with all my books. You'll see the other two behind me. Um, I'm fortunate, because I understand some authors don't get this, but they asked me, what would you like to see on the cover? And I said, I need something that represents Low Country Georgia, something that would pull you in. And, that was kind of, I gave them these marching orders, and then they came back, and I just love the trees with the Spanish moss, and the colors are just phenomenal. And then the house with the one little broken window way down there, which I think is so cool, because it kind of tells you, there's something amiss here. Yeah.
Yes, something wrong. Because that was the other part that I loved, was when Delilah would be up in the attic and kind of making her presence known. I loved that part of the story.
Thank you. I got to tell you, I am a big scaredy cat. So I
So am
am
I,
quite,
actually. But for some
so
reason, I love that.
I am quite proud of myself that I wrote those scary scenes, because I don't read a ton of horror. I will read horror-esque, like light horror.
Horror
Um,
adjacent, right?
right, horror adjacent. I like that. So, but I knew that I was going to use the ancestors in the story, and I had to do it in some way that was going to be suspenseful, right? And how do you do that? You do that by having them kind of roam through the house. And I remember the day I was writing the scene where Dina is upstairs, and she's kind of going through the boxes, and she finds the pictures, and then the light goes out. I was writing that scene, and I was home alone by myself. And I'm writing away, and I hear noise. Now I write in here, it's a little room off my living room, and I close the door. And so I hear this noise, and I'm like, hmm. So I go and I open the door, And I kind of go out and I look in the living room and I look down the hall and there's nothing. I'm like, maybe it was just the house settling. I come back in here, I close the door, I get settled again. I'm writing again. 10 minutes later, I hear the noise again. And I'm like, what the heck is that? I'm the only person. This time I walk through the house and I still don't see anything. And I'm like, okay. I come back in, I get settled. I hear that noise again. I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to write this scene when my husband gets home from work. And I think I am kind of freaking myself out. So I'm going to leave this scene right here intact and I'll be back to that. So yeah, I'm pretty proud that I was able to write scary scenes. I'm a big scary cat.
I
Big
am
scary.
too, so I'm impressed, but I just love that. I don't know, for some reason there's something about that kind of making a presence known, especially when it's not a malevolent presence. It's
Right.
different when it's
Exactly.
somebody that's like, meaning harm, but instead trying to help. I don't know, there's just something kind of cool about that. But I've done that in my house. Sometimes if my husband's traveling and I'm here by myself, I'll just lock myself in my bedroom at night because I'm such a wimp and I'm like, I don't know what that's going to do if someone's in my house. Locking myself in a bedroom probably doesn't really help, but yeah, I'm a huge.
Yeah. They walk through walls and stuff.
Yeah,
So yeah, it goes. Yeah.
not gonna solve it. I know. What about the title?
Oh my gosh. Okay, here's another confession. I'm horrible with titles. Horrible with titles. So for this book, I just didn't have a title because I think I had finally given up with my first book, which was All Her Little Secrets. The original title, my working title for that book was called The Elephant Fighter. I love that title. So we got to the point where they were going to put the book jacket together. The editor says, okay, so we need to talk about this title. It's not thrillery enough. So you need to come up with a new title. And man, I was stumped for 2 weeks. And she finally sent me an email and she's like, well, if you don't send me something in the next 2 days, I'm just going to have somebody in the sales department come up with the title. And I was like, oh, how dare, they think that I've spent all this time writing my book, baby, and they're just going to slap some title on it. So I came up with that title. With the second book, Anywhere You Run, it was the same thing. I had a different title. They were like, nah, that's not thrillery enough. I like all these esoteric kind of philosophical titles. And they're like, no, 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 no. That's not what you write. So you need another title. And it was the same thing. She pushed me up against a deadline. So I came up with that. With this one, I gave the book to him and I said, I don't have a title for it. Give me some time. And so I had like 3 months and they were like, we really need a title. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I gave them 3 titles. They were like, nah, none of those work. We'll just come up with something, and once again, I'm like, no, you will not. I'll do it. And so literally that was the last title that I came up with. And they were like, oh, we love it. And I was like, oh my gosh. Um, and then I never liked my titles. I'm always like, that's meh. But it always seems to work out. I don't know. It always seems to work out, I guess. I
Titles are
like
fun.
this title because I think it alludes to the whole nature of both heirs property and the ancestors. And so I think for this one, I actually like it. The other two I was kind of meh about, but this one out of the 3, I think I like it.
It is
Yeah.
so funny how both titles and covers signal a type of genre, like signal thriller, signal historical fiction. It's interesting. Um, the other thing I forgot to ask you about that I wanted to ask about was, I think his name was Duke. I mean, I just read the book like 2 days ago. I don't know why the characters' names are eluding me today, but Jimmy's cousin or whatever. I loved
Brother.
him. Did you have an inspiration for him?
Yeah, I did. My own uncle. Yeah, I,
Oh,
I have uncles like Jimmy and Uncle Duke. And
Duke. Okay.
yeah, Duke. And that's the thing with characters is that you know, people are like, is that based on any particular person? And they're really my character is really kind of amalgam of people that I know. My first book, All Her Little Secrets, which was a legal thriller that takes place inside of a corporation. And I used to work in-house as a lawyer in a corporation. And it's so funny because I kind of put together some of those characters, especially the bad ones, based on some people that I knew. And what's so funny is after the book was published, some of my former colleagues were like, yeah, that guy was wild. If I ever met somebody like that, I'm like, I know. And I'm like, meanwhile, the book is based, that character is based on that very person. I'm like, yeah, they
You're
didn't
like,
even
if only
recognize
you
themselves.
knew. Yeah, exactly.
They didn't even recognize themselves. But Uncle Duke is somebody who was kind of like my uncles. My uncles were, and Jimmy too, they were very, very serious about family. They were like, you just don't mess with family. And so they would often take matters into their own hands. Now, I don't know that they ever beat up anybody, but I wouldn't put it past them if
I
if
love
I could
them.
say that. Yeah. Uncle Duke cracks me up.
He was a
He's
great
funny.
character.
Yeah, he's funny.
Well, before we wrap up, what have you read or what are you planning to read? Like what's on your bedside table?
Oh shoot, I forgot to bring this on the other side. Hang on one second. Let me go get it so you
Okay.
can see.
I love looking at her bookshelves.
Thank you.
I'm looking
Okay.
at all your shelves going, what else there? I see your books, but I'm seeing what else.
Yeah, my books, my stack of Bibles. You probably can't see this for the glare, but that's a picture of my mom.
Oh,
When she was, yeah, you can tell I was very close to my mom. This is a picture of my mom when she was like 17.
oh,
Isn't
she's
she gorgeous?
beautiful.
Look at that dress. I'm like,
Yeah.
Stunning.
man, I'd love to have that dress. Um, so what I am reading, I have not been reading anything for the past month simply because I am on a deadline to finish revisions to my fourth book. So I got to turn that book in on Monday. But
Oh,
I've got
very
two
soon.
books that, yes, very soon. So I've got two books that are sitting right here on my chair, ready to dig into. And the first one is You Know What You Did by KT Nguyen. And this one seems so good. I have not started it yet. But it is about a Vietnamese family that immigrates to this country. And the daughter has a medical condition, OCD, and it plays into a murder that takes place and I just find that fascinating. I told you earlier, I like books that teach me something where I'm going to learn something. And so I'm kind of fascinated by people that have OCD. So I am interested in reading that. And then this one is by Kelly Garrett, also another mystery, Missing White Woman. And I just got my hands on this. So I'm really looking forward to reading this one as well. So I've got some travel next week. I turn in my book on Monday so I can start to dig in. Yeah.
When does the next one come out? In like another year, year and a half? Is that kind of the
Yeah, it usually takes about a year from the time the publisher accepts it. So I turn this one in if they accept it, because we'll go with some back and forth. They accept it this summer, so we're probably talking again next year this time.
Yay, good.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody else have anything before we wrap up? Well,
Are
this was
you allowed to
wonderful.
tell
Oh,
us
sorry,
about
go
the
ahead,
book?
Cynthia. Sorry.
Sorry, just now that I'm curious about the new book, are you allowed to tell us like the theme or anything
Yeah,
about?
I
Yeah.
can tell you the premise. Now keep in mind, I'm always doing something that my my editors don't want me to do. So they were kind of like, yeah, write another What You Leave Behind. I was like, nah, I don't want to do that one. So this one is something I also thought I'd never do, but the premise is that young wealthy couples are dying in mysterious ways, and their young children have gone missing. And two detectives must get to the bottom of it and find the children and who's killed the parents. Now, I always said I would never write a serial killer book. Never, 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 never do that. I was like, that's just too many bodies. I don't want to, now. But this book explores, interestingly enough, motherhood and what it means to protect children, who protects children in this society. And it deals with everything from, adoption to, parental custody. But who are the protectors of our children in this society? So that's kind of the overarching thing.
Sounds really good.
Thank you. Again, I'm always like, no, I never thought I wanted to write a historical book either. So we'll see. I never say never anymore. Let's
Yeah,
put it that way.
exactly. And you just
Yeah.
have to write what interests you, because I always think that shines through on the page. When somebody's writing about something that appeals to them, that they are tied to, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, oh, almost definitely. And in this book, we kind of explore who, like I said, protects the children. I have 3 children of my own, but it took me a long time to get here. I had a lot of fertility issues. I had a lot of miscarriages. And so I delve into some of that in this book as well. I tend to gravitate to women's issues. My first book it was a little bit of women's fiction and what it's like to be a woman in corporate America. My second book, obviously, 2 sisters who are growing up in the Jim Crow South and what it means to be a Black woman under that kind of oppression. And so I'm always kind of exploring what it looks like for us in this country.
Well, I'm glad that you do that, because I think you produce really enthralling stories, and I always feel like I learn a lot.
Thank you so much for that. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you
For
so much for
having
your
me.
time, and thank you
This
for
was fun.
popping back on. Sorry there was confusion on the time, so I appreciate your flexibility.
No, not at all. Thank you for having me.
All right, bye, and good
Enjoy.
luck with your deadline.
Thank you.
Thank you
All right,
so much. I'll need
bye.
it. Bye-bye.
Bye.